Instead of a dark lord, you would have a queen. Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn, tempestuous as the sea, and stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. Man, what a different story that would have been. Evil Galadriel. Maybe that's what Rings of Power is going for. But what if I told you this story already exists? And we don't have to insult Tolkien's legacy even further to find it. Because as surprising as it may be, this story and the villainous woman it follows wasn't influenced by Tolkien at all. Tolkien was influenced by her.
I don't hear that very often.
Immortal sorceress, ancient philosopher, jealous seductress, cruel tyrant queen. She was the dark sorceress that ensnared Tolkien in his youth, with him going so far to say, as a boy, she interested me as much as anything. It's one of the few times Tolkien has ever given praise to a more modern work. I can totally understand why he began here, because after reading this character for the first time, I think she ensnared me a little bit too. Welcome to my complete character analysis of one of fantasy's best and earliest villains, H. Rider Haggard's infamous demon of beauty, Ayesha, she who must be obeyed. Let's get into it. The era of fantasy Ayesha comes from is a lot different from the modern fantasy era you're probably accustomed to. And in this new generation, H. Rider Haggard was truly the odd one out. Rather than sampling from ancient myths or Arthurian tales, he was more a writer of pulp adventure stories, akin to something like Treasure Island. Of his books, it's 1887's She that resonated the most with Tolkien himself. The book is about three Englishmen as they go on an adventure into the heartland of Africa in search for the infamous She Who Must Be Obeyed. But Ayesha doesn't appear straight in front of them off the boat. Like Galadriel, we hear bits and pieces of her infamy and legend before ever seeing her in the flesh. She's said to be immortal, to have power over all things living or dead. And she seems to have this supernatural ability to know of events around her without her actually ever being there. Breadcrumbs of her power and identity are littered throughout the character's journey to the city of Kor, not only of her strength, but of her cruelty. They had a queen. She was their queen. But she was very rarely seen, perhaps once in 2 or 3 years, when she came forth to pass sentence on some offenders. We learn quickly that Ayesha isn't loved by her followers, she's feared. And at first I was uncertain how much respect I should be giving to that fear. So far the novel, in my opinion, had been a little aimless and dry. I worried whether this book and the character at the heart of it was truly promising more than it could deliver. But when the characters finally meet the Queen of Kor, everything seemed to click into place. That first scene with Ayesha is one that sticks in the mind for so many reasons. First, the reverence shown to her by the native man Bilali, who in the story had been a mentor and protector of the main protagonist, whose name is Holly, reveals immediately how powerful even just her reputation is. Bilali tells Holly to get down on his hands and knees and crawl to her like she's a literal god. And once they reach the tent, Holly can only see her dark silhouette through the cloth, but even her concealed beauty is enough to almost terrify him. In this opening scene, we efficiently learn 3 of Ayesha's most prominent traits. First is just how evocative and mystic she feels to our Western protagonists. When she speaks, Haggard describes her voice as soft and silvery, and she also does not speak the native African tongue, instead more of a classical Arabic, hinting at her fascinating secret backstory. Now, just based on the time of the book, it's pretty obvious that a bit of the Victorian Orientalism was seeping into the pages here. Something to be critical of in this book as a whole. But I at least think Ayesha herself is done well enough in that regard, because everything in this scene is dripping with an evocative, sensual energy. The second thing we learn is the confirmation of her true nature. Cruelty. When Bilali leaves, Holly is left alone with the Queen, and we get a sense that her famous cruelty is not really an exaggeration. She says she wouldn't make Holly crawl like one of her slaves, and even suggests that sometimes she wishes she could blast them for the hell of it. Don't mistake her for some sympathetic villain. Even Holly himself isn't deceived. And the third thing we learn is probably her most surprising and interesting trait, her wealth of worldly knowledge. When Holly says he's afraid because of her beauty, Ayesha laughs and says, "I see that men still know how to beguile us women with false words." Notice the tense she speaks in. She's constantly referring to things in the past tense, like a vampire who has slept in slumber for 1,000 years and now is reawoken. In fact, the vampire comparison is not so far away, because it's revealed she's nearly 2,000 years old. She speaks of the Roman Empire, of old Jerusalem, and asks which pharaoh still sits in Egypt. And all of her time alive, sitting there to ponder, I imagine, gives her this really interesting self-awareness. What are 10 or 20 or 50,000 years in the history of life? Why, in 10,000 years, scarce will the rain and storms lessen a mountain top by a span in thickness. In 2,000 years, these caves hath not changed. Nothing has changed but the beasts, and man who is as the beasts. There are probably a dozen little monologues like this, but don't let any of this fool you. She is still 100% a temptress at her core, and she reveals it here. All of these historical talks with her and Holly have still been under the veil of the dark cloth, but once she steps out of it, everything is revealed. She moves with a serpent-like grace, and at the first sight of her, Haggard describes it as thus. On her little feet were sandals, fastened with studs of gold. About the waist, her white kirtle was fastened by a double-headed snake. I gazed above at her face, and, I do not exaggerate, shrank back blinded and amazed. I have heard of beauty from the celestial beings. Now I saw it. This beauty, with all its awful loveliness and purity, was evil. And we get a sense from Holly's description, not of loving worship to this woman, but in fact a deep sense of guilt and shame. He cannot help but fall in love with her, and says that any mortal man would. And Ayesha, most dangerously of all, is very aware of her power, and uses it like a weapon for the rest of her story. But if Ayesha was merely a dangerous beauty that was written fairly competently, I wouldn't be so impressed. Instead, while 10% of the scenes are kind of like the one we read earlier, the rest are in a completely different lane. He paces her kind of like you would the reveal of a dragon. A lot of slow, serpentine speech. A few sparks of smoke, maybe, before you reveal the full flame. And Ayesha certainly has the gift of gab. Her conversations ranging from the ethics of Christianity, the downfall and mistakes of democracy, and of course the price of an eternal life. And it's the sign of a good character when you can just sit and listen to them ramble on for conversations on end. But honestly, her biggest surprise to me was the reveal of a more subtle level of intelligence. Specifically, how she changes. And no, I'm not saying she goes on this grand character arc. This is certainly not a story where Ayesha suddenly changes her villainous ways. She is truly a force of nature. And like the weather, she can be both sometimes warm as summer, or jealous as a blistering cold winter. And it's here in the story we first see her raging storm. Throughout the whole narrative, Ayesha really only desires one thing. Like every good classic temptress trope, only one lucky or unlucky man is permitted to be hers. And in this book, it just so happens to be Holly's adopted son named Leo. And upon seeing Leo for the first time, Ayesha goes into shock. For she believes he is the reincarnation of her old ancient lover, Callicrates. Except there is one problem. Leo is deathly injured. And far worse than that, he has recently married one of the native girls named Istani. And we finally get to see Ayesha without the mask of calmness and tact that she typically displays. For Ayesha herself says she is a woman of many moods, and one of those moods just happens to be jealousy. She must die, even now. I know that I can take him from her. For dwells there a man upon this earth who can resist me if I put out my strength? Holly tries his best he can to calm her, and for a while it works, for Ayesha doesn't kill Ustani and lets the woman live. But Ustani, who is so lovable and just great, tries to fight back. And it results, in my opinion, for one of the best scenes in the fantasy genre thus far. You gotta go red for this one here. Because chapter 20, named Triumph, is perhaps the best chapter of fantasy I have read so far on my Great Fantasy Reading Challenge. And the reason why I'm including it here is because this is the scene where the Queen of Kor is at the peak of her literary powers. At this point in the story, Leo has been healed by Ayesha. And Ayesha, not willing to reveal her true tyrant self to him, kind of turns into his humble healer, or at least pretends to be. It's another sinister layer to her character, and another sign of just how tactful and smart and experienced she is with all the long years she's lived. And Leo, being a normal man, and Ayesha, being who she is, begins to take a fascination to her beauty. But Leo is a good dude, and he married another woman, Ustane, and doesn't want to betray her. But what Leo doesn't know is that before he was healed, Ayesha sent Ustane away, like we spoke of before. Ayesha lies and tells Leo that she just ran away, and definitely does not say that she threatened to kill her. But the real domino of the scene begins to fall when Ustane reappears when the coast is clear. Ayesha isn't around, and Ustane tells Leo the truth. She is fearing for her life, and that he must, if he wishes to be with her, run away with her. Leo, not really knowing Ayesha's true motives, thinks it must just be some misunderstanding, and says they should go talk with Ayesha and explain himself to her. But Ustane pleads, saying they must go now. And it is at this point that Ayesha walks in. A painful silence follows, but Ustane, knowing what will come, tells Ayesha just to slay her and be done with it. Leo doesn't understand any of this. He says that Ustane and him were married according to the customs. But instead of speaking to him, Ayesha turns to Ustane and says, "Has thou aught to say, woman? Thou silly straw, thou feather, who didst think to float towards thy passion's petty ends, even against the great wind of my will." When was the last time you heard a temptress trope say something like that? And Holly, watching from the side in terror, sees Ustane, the petty native girl, in front of she who must be obeyed herself, defy her. And she, in a scene that is so powerful and motivating in its tragedy, says that Ayesha shall never know love from Leo, the one man she wants. It's full of triumph over Ayesha at last. Or so I thought. For Ustane's voice rings loud, and she bellows out her curses, until suddenly the cry of valor shifts into one of mingled terror. Ayesha stands, with one hand risen, pointed towards her, and Ustane, with gaze of woeful horror, eyes growing large, lets out a piercing scream, and falls stone dead to the floor at the foot of Leo. For a moment, Leo doesn't understand what has happened. But instead of killing him, she tells him the truth, that she has been waiting for him for 2,000 years, for he is the reincarnation of her old lover, Callicrates. Leo says it's a lie. He says he hates Ayesha, and says he would rather befriend the Lord of Hell than her. And my heart is beating at this point, right? Because what is Ayesha going to do about this? And Ayesha, as if you couldn't hate her any more in this moment, says, "Yet within a very little space shalt thou creep to my knee, and swear that thou dost love me. Come, there is no time like the present. Here before this dead girl who loved thee, let us put it to the proof." This chapter is called Triumph, right? And when I saw that title, I thought to myself, yes, this is finally the time Ayesha will get her comeuppance. Ayesha says to look upon her now, and she drops her veil and fixes her deep and glowing eyes upon Leo. And slowly, piece by piece, we watch Leo succumb. The pacing of this scene, it's like watching a man go insane in slow motion. His fists unclasp, and his shaking terror relaxes under her gaze. His astonishment grows into admiration, and then into fascination, and the more he looks, the more her dread beauty takes hold of his senses. And even for a moment, he looks down and sees Ustane's dead corpse, and he even struggles, even turns halfway around to fly away, to escape, but he can't. Leo, disbelieving what is happening even in the moment he decides it, asks if she is even a woman, and Ayesha smiles. Leo falls into her grip, and they embrace over Ustane's still warm corpse. Damn. Only a meme could really display my thoughts on this one. Incredible scene. First fiery pen scene on this channel, which I do not give out lightly. All I will say about this, and the real reason why it's in this video, is because it sold me 1000% on Ayesha. Because so many characters talk, but very few walk the walk like this. So the verdict from me is simple. So far on my great fantasy reading list, Ayesha, she herself, is the best character I have read so far. It's not really close, and there is a lot of competition ahead, but I certainly don't see her losing this top spot anytime soon. That's really why I wanted to make this video in the first place. Because everyone knows the Galadriels of the world. And I understand, most of the time, modern readers prefer the newer model. But damn it, I have read a lot of fantasy in my age, and this time the old guard just wins. Because how could you top this execution of a character, especially for one novel that I've read of her? Is she the most original? No. Is she lovable? Not in the ways that count, I suppose. But she is a damn good character, and any day that you can pick up a book and read a character as good as her is a damn good day. So that was the video. It's the first character analysis I have done on this channel, so please give me some feedback and comment who you guys think I should do a breakdown of next. And for those who wish to see more of my thoughts on She, the book as a whole, since I'm not making a review on it, you can check out my quick review on GOODREADS. There I post all of my ratings and my opinions on books as I go through the Great Fantasy Reading Challenge. Or if you are not on GOODREADS and still want to know my rating for the book, you can check the link in the channel description and click on my official books ranking, where I post all of my book rankings and even update them monthly, so it's kind of like an ever-changing chart. And if you just want to follow along with the channel, the best way to do that is to subscribe and comment something to help me learn and make better videos. But for now, you have passed the test of this video. I shall disappear from your screens, go back into the Great Fantasy Reading Challenge, and remain your humble newbie booktuber, the Everyman. Ciao.